Good morning, Joseph. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thank you. How about yourself?
Yeah, pretty good, thank you. To all of those watching today, we have with us Joseph Zintseme from Bridge Network, which is a reconciliation ministry. Joseph has been working in the Ministry of Reconciliation for more than 30 years and has carried out this work on every continent except Antarctica, probably because there aren't too many people there. I think if there were enough people gathered, you would be there to talk about reconciliation.
Yes, it is a passion of my heart, my dream, my my calling.
Yeah.
Uh,
So my name is Josmar Roman, and I don't even know. I'm a mom. I'm a corporate lawyer. I'm a business strategist. But I also feel really passionate about the Ministry of Reconciliation, which was introduced to me by you back in 2005 when you were
2005 in the city of Cartagena, Colombia.
yeah, when you were speaking at a discipleship training school. And I was a student there along with 39 other students representing more than 12 countries around the
Mm,
world.
yes, I remember. It was a memorable time.
So in the previous recording that we did, we talked a little bit about what reconciliation is as a ministry. And I think today we thought we would talk a little bit about identity in reconciliation. Do you want to kick that off with some thoughts?
Yes, it is the issue of identity. It is a it is a really huge question. We can talk uh, on it on several interview. But the issue of identity, it is a central question of our our existence, and in the work of reconciliation is a very key and a sensitive area, and it requires a lot of tact in order to deal with this aspect of identity in a work of reconciliation. In fact, there cannot be an efficient reconciliation, a deep work of reconciliation and peacemaking without dealing with the issue of identity in the work of reconciliation. It's not possible.
And why is that?
Why? Because when we talk about identity, we're talking about our existence. We're talking about who we are, who I am as a person, and that have a lot of ramification. It started with the fact that we all human being from every nation, all ethnicity, all belong to God, all come from God. And then that's very important. Then you have the fact that in the many people or most of human being around the world has experienced something in their identity that went off, and therefore is affecting who they are. The struggle that we are experiencing in our world today, like we talked in our previous interview, it has to do with the core issue of identity. Who am I? Because once I find out who I am, then there is a lot of issue. If I find it and I embrace it, finding is one aspect, one thing. Embracing it and then living that out is resolving a lot of issue, a lot of struggle. And I think we can talk more about that in the minutes that are following.
Yeah. And I think that as we as we resolve the issue of who we are and who God says that we are, it automatically begins to draw us closer to God, closer to ourselves, you know, closer to being able to love ourselves,
Yeah.
closer to each other, because it gives us the confidence and a peace. And so we're not sort of, you know, almost at war with one another, you know, in that undercurrent way that we can non-verbally wage war against others when we're insecure. And so what occurs to me, if my story, and I'm sorry for my lighting today, my mom moved my brother and I permanently to the United States from Puerto Rico when I was 8. And as a good immigrant mother, you know, she told us that we were American, you know, and Puerto Ricans were given U.S. citizenship just in time to send us to war. We were given citizenship, and then our men were given the selective service card, and they were told, you know, you're now a citizen, you must go to war or rot in jail. A lot of our men died in jail. And a lot of our men, you know, my great grandfather went to war, World War II. He was stationed in Japan. So, you know, we were American, but even as a 8-9-year-old, something didn't resonate. I had the privilege of going to an African American school in an African American community, and that was wonderful because it meant that I didn't lose out on learning about my enslaved African ancestors, who are very much a part of my Caribbean culture. But when we talked about, you know, founding fathers, and we talked about, you know, U.S. history, there was no point of connection for me. Time and time again, I struggled to find the point of connection. And so even as a very young girl, I remember, so we moved when I was 8. Around the age of 10, my mom found an envelope in my room hidden with lots of little, you know, dollar bills and $5 bills. Anytime she had given us allowance, or anytime anyone had given us birthday money, Christmas money, I had been saving it for years. And, you know, she found $170 in there, and this is a long time ago, and I'm 10, and she was terrible. You know, what is my 10-year-old doing with all these small bills in her room? And my answer was simple: I'm going home. I'm going home. Like, I was out. I wanted to go home. And some of the things that I took for granted, because you don't know what happens for other people, and it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized that some of my experiences might be different. My mom started sending my brother and I back home to Puerto Rico to be with my dad, our dad, every summer. And he would take us to the river near our home. And I remember I would float on my back in the river. And in my imagination, I would watch this indigenous young woman who was me. I knew she was me a long time ago in this place, in this river. And I would just watch her. I would just watch her walk along the riverbank. I would watch her walk along the trees. I would just watch her, knowing that that's who I was a long time ago. Which was odd, and I never shared that with anybody. And then, you know, but we were American. And I went to university, and it wasn't until during university I traveled the world as part of my studies. And the more I learned about other cultures, the less American I felt. The more I had to go back and really challenge what my mom was saying, because the culture didn't match the expectations, the norms, they didn't match. So it wasn't until I graduated university that I started researching, and it was hard. It was hard to find history books on Puerto Rico. But the more I found, the more that I understood the very complicated history that we have with the United States, and the more I realized that I was Puerto Rican, and that meant that I was indigenous, that I was enslaved West African, and that I had some ancestry from Spain, but definitely not as much as we pretend. And two quick side bits, you know, since much later, so since the year 2000, they've been able to do mitochondrial DNA testing, and they have been able to prove that overwhelmingly the Puerto Rican population is indigenous, even the ones that look African, because the African DNA, you know, pushes through. Their genetic makeup is overwhelmingly indigenous as well. And I think of John Leguizamo, who's was a famous Puerto Rican actor, and how he did a Broadway show called Freak, where he talks about how he struggled with his identity growing up. And he tried to be Irish when he had Irish friends, and he tried to be Jewish. And when he dated a Jewish woman, he ultimately married her. And, you know, he tried to be Black, and he gave it a go. He gave all these different cultures a go. And as an adult, he marries this Jewish woman. He has a Jewish son. His son is asking about his ancestry. John Leguizamo takes a DNA test, and it comes back, and the result, it was, you know, 99.9% indigenous Puerto Rican.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the context for, or part of the context for, I'm sitting in this hot and sweaty room in Cartagena, Colombia, on the coast in an evening, and this tall Black man comes in with a very deep voice, who was obviously you, and you start talking about identity and who we are. And at some point in that week, you were calling us up to pray for our ancestry. And when it was funny, when you called anyone up who was of West African or African descent, you know, I stood up confidently. You know, the kids in the room, you know, one of them even told me to sit down, you know, siéntate, you know, like, what are you doing? And I paused and I thought, maybe I'm wrong. But because I had the honor of meeting one of my great grandmothers who looked West African, you know, she sounded West African, she cooked West African, she dressed West African. You know, we spent some time living with her. She came to mind, and I thought, no, I think I know what I'm talking about. And that was easy, you know, being prayed for my African ancestry. That was easy in that moment. And I think part of that is because I had the honor of going to these African American schools.
Yeah.
But the next day, when you prayed for indigenous ancestry, and you said to me, you know, you are Taino. And I just needed someone to say that. I just needed someone to acknowledge who I am and to see me. And I know that you remember, I just fell to pieces. I was just crying. I was doubled over. I was, you know, I could hardly get off the floor. I was just sobbing. I just needed someone to see me. And that was so powerful for me.
Yeah. That's wow. That's really moving. That's moving story. Still, after many years, 2005. You know, when
15.
talking about it, you
Yeah.
know, you still have that. I wanted us to go back to, you know, to back in the scripture to see to show exactly what we are talking about in Genesis chapter 1 verse 26 to 28. I want to read that for us. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping things that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that move on the earth. So here is the source or the origin of our identity. So we have here the Holy Trinity, in consultation with each other, decided to create mankind. So we have here in this passage different stages in the creation of mankind. So the first stage is a stage of consultation. And the second stage is a stage of design. See, okay, the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit agree to create mankind in his image. And then they decided that the function of mankind, and they say he will have to be spreading, but he say he will subdue the earth. The earth is created. Now mankind will subdue the earth. That's mean it will spread out. So in this design stage yet, it's still mankind is not designed, it's not created, materialized yet. It's still in the conception. So in the conception, way before time or before the creation, the Taino nation were already designed. The Yambasa nation, to whom I belong, were already designed. And so the Inuit nation were already designed. And so when now God materialized and formed the first human being, Adam and Eve, and then he conferred the blessing over them, empowered them. He said to subdue the earth, to populate the earth. And so, because in that is where you find mankind, because of this empowerment, spreading and conquering this the space in order to create nations, to create civilization, to create a culture. But that was already in the provision of God, in the mind of God. So you see, so no nation exists per chance. Each nation exists by design. You see, so when you or I or anybody listening to us is denied our origin, which will be in your case Taino, Africano, Spaniard. So you carry more gene than me. And in my case, it will be Yambasa. When we deny that to you or to me, to any mankind, any human being, we are causing tremendous prejudice to that person. The hurt that the person carry, the deep wound is created in the life of the person. And so the struggle, people will have the struggle that they might not understand why the struggle. It's because what God has intended has gone off. Now our cultural identity is just one small aspect of it. Because the biggest, the reconciliation, the reconciliation with our cultural identity or the healing in that aspect is very important, but it's a portion of it. We have to go all the way to the source when mankind was designed. Designed in God's image and likeness. So the reconciliation, the important step in the process of reconciling and seeing our identity being healed and restored ought to go all the way to God, from where mankind and each nation, each community, every ethnic group on the face of the earth originated from. So in another word, the way we are treating one another, when we start understanding this, the way we treating one another change, because we are realizing that these ethnic groups, this individual who walk the earth, has been designed by God to exist, to carry the identity that they carry, to carry the names that they carry, to carry the skin tones that they carry, or even the hair texture that they carry. Why would the people force you not to stand up for the African heritage?
Shame.
You know why? Because the African heritage has been thus far one of the most shamed lineage in our days. So, including the African people, it is difficult for some of us to identify and fully embrace with pride this lineage, the African lineage, and understand that there is no mistake at all, but it was our existence now from the various nations that we are as African descendants, our existence and all our future all were designed and desired by God. No need to have to be ashamed of it. But the reality that we are living on earth today is that it has been suppressed, it has been ashamed, and is making it difficult for people to want to identify with that lineage. That's why people didn't want you. And I'm very sure that among those who didn't want you to stand up, we had African descendants among them.
Well, I don't know if you remember, but when I got to the front of the class, I turned around and I called out every single student where it was obvious that they had African ancestry by name. You. I mean, I knew them. I called them by name. I was giving them every opportunity to reconsider. And they all said, no, not me. In fact, one of the students from the Dominican Republic, right, the first island in the Caribbean colonized, the first one to have enslaved Africans, and you know, they look as Black as Jamaicans. And she certainly looked African American, African Caribbean, and she's, no, not me. You know, I'm only indigenous, and she might have indigenous ancestry. We share, so Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico shared Taino ancestry. However, in Puerto Rico, where statistically, you know, where they took a census, even in the 1700s, we were still indigenous. When the United States invaded, we were still indigenous. The history of the Dominican Republic is very, very different, and they are overwhelmingly African. And she, you know, no, not me. You know, there was another student who used to always, our sort of running joke, you know, he'd be like, oh, I'm black, in his thick, you know, Spanish accent. And we joked how we were both Black. But when it came time to stand up and, you know, be prayed for, not him, he was only Spanish.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I do remember, and I can see that that young lady. I mean, she's not young today, I'm sure.
That's what I'm saying. We're still young.
Yeah. I mean, her skin color, she just had straight hair, but in a
But it
Dominican
was
Republic,
curly. Her hair was
yeah, I know.
curlier than mine. She just straightened it.
Yeah, I know. They have acquired, sophisticated art to straighten their hair. But that's but that is the shame that has been attached to the African people regarding their African identity, heritage. But that's because we're still missing the understanding that each and every one of us has been designed first by God in his image and likeness. And then he went on by performing that design, materializing it, creating mankind in his image and likeness.
Yeah.
Every one of us. So if God designed and created every one of us in his image and likeness, refusing someone to be who he is or refusing to be what God has made me to be, it is an insult to the designer. It is an insult to the creator. He should not have made us who we are. You understand? This is the greatest mind that we cannot fathom. The wisdom, the intellect behind the design and the creation of mankind.
Yeah, and I think, depending on where you are on this journey, or where some of the viewers are on this journey, it begs the question, right? It begs the question, does that mean that it was God's will for West Africans to be enslaved? Does that mean that it was God's will for indigenous people to be subjugated? Because if he created me, that at the beginning of time, then he purposed, he planned and he purposed, colonialism and slavery and all of that. And that was definitely, and some Christians will argue that. Some people, I remember so she's still my best friend. We became best friends at age 15. She was an immigrant to the US as well, and she comes from Ghana. And I remember once she was just like, well, colonialism happened in West Africa because we were sinning against God. And that was, what we deserved as a result of our sin. And I remember thinking, but the Europeans were sinning against God too. So, where was the consequence of their sin? And so I struggled with that for a long time. And during those early years of journeying on the reconciliation journey with you and David Pa, one of the things sort of kind of came around for me is I got to a place with God where I felt like 100% I was God's dream of what would happen when the nations met again, when these nations when all of them re-met. Because we were all in Africa together at one point anyway, but we all spread apart, the continents drifted. But I felt confident I am God's dream for the nations meeting, just not in that way. You know what I mean? Like, we could have met differently. People could have fallen in love and moved across continents differently. Yeah, trade around goods and spices and animals could have happened differently. Agricultural development and eventually industrialization could have happened differently. We could have done it in a way that honored the international treaties that Europe had with Africa, with Northern Africa, at the time that they decided to violate those treaties and begin the slave trade. And they could have honored the way that the indigenous in the New World, or it wasn't new, but in North and South America and the Caribbean, greeted them. That could have been honored and respected. And I could have still been me, with Spanish ancestry, with West African ancestry, with indigenous Puerto Rican ancestry, with Tamil, Indian ancestry. I could still be me, but that story could be a love story and a story of honor and respect.
You see, what what you're raising here is a huge subject of
Isn't it
debate.
all?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we want to venture into that, but it's very important point. Is that, see, what happened to our world has caused in us a lot of confusion, and again, confusion has created in us identity crisis, and the identity crisis have pushed us far from who God made us to be and from God Himself. Because He calls us to view the world and view ourselves from the perspective of the dominant, like your friend, she's seeing herself from the perspective of the dominant. So if God has created the West African people, how do you justify that they will be taken by European into the Americas?
In
Where
that,
was God? Where was God? You're asking all these questions, and then sometimes you come to that conclusion that many people has come into. But as if we judging people by the standard of God, then you will come back, you will come to that question, the answer or the question you ask. But what about the European? Were the European nation holy nations? No sin were committed by European? You see, when you read some of the excerpt in the history of people, European themselves, who have traveled to West Africa during the period of European conquest and trading the African into the Americas, what they are saying about Western African nation, they are marveled to see the morality, the structure, the organization, the self-government that they are finding in the West African nations. You see? So, that's what
sorry,
I'm saying.
I'm just gonna interrupt you because in the first draft of your book, you have some of the accounts.
Yes.
And if it's okay, I'd like to read this particular account on the Kingdom of Benin, because in my lifetime, the
Yes.
things that are said about Benin are awful and outrageous and have been used to justify a great number of sin. And so this is John Wesley, who is English. An extract from John Wesley's thoughts upon slavery. You added it as an addendum to the end of the first draft of your book. And I mean, I haven't read John Wesley, but I've heard about him, from any church I've ever attended. Everyone talks about John Wesley. So just here's what he says. The accounts we have of the natives of the Kingdom of Benin is that they are a reasonable and good-natured people, sincere and inoffensive, and do no injustice either to one another or to strangers. They are civil and courteous. If you make them a present, they endeavor to repay it double. And if they are trusted till the ship returns next year, they are sure honestly to pay the whole debt. Theft is punished among them, although not with the same severity as murder. If a man and woman of any quality are taken in adultery, they are certain to be put to death, and their bodies thrown on a dunghill and left a prey to wild beasts. They are punctually just and honest in their dealings, and are also very charitable, the king and the great lords taking care to employ all that are capable of any work, and those that are utterly helpless they keep for God's sake. so that here also are no beggars.
That's right. Yes. So we have a lot of history account from different perspectives, and it is reminding me of what has been said about Haiti. The reason Haiti is poor, and the whole world have heard why Haiti is poor. Like they are poor. They are poor because when they when they fought the French army of Napoleon and overcame them, declared they are independent, they have made a covenant with the devil that once if they have the victory over the French, they will dedicate the land for 200 years. That story has run all over in the churches, but also outside the walls of the churches. People have believed that story to be real and true. The Haitians themselves, many have come to believe that story. Well, when I dive into reading the story, the history of Haiti, their revolution, and what happened after the revolution, I had a different perspective. I have a different perspective why Haiti is poor. And so I say, where is that covenant? I read, I searched pretty much everywhere I could. I did not find any trace of the covenant that they made. I asked a gentleman who has been helping me with some researchers, a British gentleman, to do the research for me and help me find a story. I say, I'm too involved. Let me push back and have somebody else look into that.
Yeah.
He searched, he came back to me. He said, there is no authentic document or covenant of a sort. But that started by a missionary, white missionary, that Roman. And it spread out, and many people come to believe. Now, the reason Haiti, when the Haitian got their independence, after they fought the French and overcome them, they had their independence. Listen, they started building their country. 25 years later, the French came back with a fleet threatening to overthrow, to enslave back the Haitian. The Haitian did not want to engage anymore in the fight against the French. And the French told them, France told them, unless you pay us a reparation for freeing yourself, we are putting you back into slavery. And what they charged them was 300,000 francs, million. At the time, the Haitian negotiated, and they end up agreeing for 90 million franc at the time. And it's what the Haitian have done. They cut the lumbers, they dug their gold to pay that reparation to France.
And France, that's a laugh and a half, hey?
Yeah. And then they borrow money from the US with the huge interest rates in order to pay France, so they will leave them alone. And do you know how long Haiti finished paying the debt to the United States? 1947. In addition to that, the US Marine invaded Haiti for 19 years. They took over
1990.
90. No, no, no.
Nine,
10, 19, 19.
19. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a 19. They took over the stockhouse, the customs, all the port was money. The government was under the U.S. Marine.
Military rule.
And,
Yes, that happened in Puerto Rico as well from
yeah,
1898 when they first
and
invaded in the 50s, I think.
the money that was found in the Haitian treasury was taken by the Marine and moved to New York. And that money has never been returned up until today.
Yeah,
Now,
I grew up being told that there were no resources in Puerto Rico, and come to find out, we did have gold, we did have jade, we have oil.
yeah.
Yeah.
But also, if you look in take in consideration the time that Haiti was free from slavery when they declared their independence in 1803, the United States still have a slave, the African under slavery, Jamaica, Cuba. Was it Cuba? Yeah, Cuba, Puerto Rico, all Latin America, the rest, the entire Caribbean, everyone still held the African under slavery. So
Yeah.
they will be themselves an isolated island. Who would like to trade with such a nation? Who is representing a threat to them? Because all of them are holding people who look like them in the slavery. So Haiti will not develop themselves without trading with other nations.
No, and that
It's
would have been
not possible.
impossible.
So when you just read the history, like I say, man, you see, and then all these other factors, and they say that happened to Haiti to cause them to be where they are today.
Mm.
You know,
And that,
and
sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna interrupt because we only have a few minutes left, and
Go
I
ahead.
just want to reflect why what you're saying that matters, and why it matters is because it is, our story informs how we see ourselves and what we believe ourselves capable of being, of doing for God, for the kingdom. It informs how we present ourselves today, how we stand, and the duty we feel or don't feel to humanity, to each other, to family, to God. So a child who grows up thinking, I come from a sinful nation, a Haitian child who grows up thinking, I come from a sinful nation, and, God is punishing us for our sin, will have a very low view of themselves, of who they are, of what they can accomplish. Their self-talk will be remarkably negative, and it will impede them of becoming the person that God has called them to be, of fulfilling the plans and the purposes that God has for them. A Haitian child that grows up thinking, we were the first African nation to fight and successfully win our independence. We stood on our own 2 feet. We had resources. We sent soldiers to the United States to help them win their freedom against Great Britain. We stood as a flag for freedom. We repaid debts that were unjust. We are a nation that is, a nation of character, that is true to their word, that is strong. That self-talk and that self-belief and the things that it will drive them to do that are positive for God, for the kingdom, for humanity, will be completely different. Here's a person who
It will change the entire nation. Not only the Haitians send the troops to help the United States, they send troops to go help Simon Bolivar free the New Grenada. I mean, this guy where everywhere oppression exists, they say we want to come and fight to free the people. They were thirsty for freedom and they wanted everyone to be free. This is the reality. Let me tell you another story about Haiti. I was speaking to the Haitian in a high school, in the city of Mont Saint Nicolas. That's where Christopher Columbus first landed in the America. So, I asked them a question: where do you think Haitian came from? And one student stood up, say he does not believe that the Haitian people are created by God. I say, please defend your case. And he said the reason is because when you take the Bible, the drawing of Adam and Eve is white. So if Adam and Eve are white and they Haitian are black, they can never have come from God. That is what is ingrained in the mind of many people. And then another student raised his hand and come and say he believed that Haitian people has also been created by God, because when the Bible is talking about the creation, the Bible does not say that Adam and Eve were white. The Bible just they say God created them in his image and likeness. So imagine that the future of these young people, those who fit in that category, that believe that God did not create them. So if God did not create them, they must have a sign from the devil. Since the devil is represented in a lot of drawing and cartoon, black. So you are communicating to them that black is devil. And there's no future, there's no hope. That's a deep identity crisis causing in the life of these young people who need to be strengthened. They need to be empowered and take the destiny, their individual destiny, but the destiny of their nation into the hand to rebuild that nation, because the Haitian people are the most resilient people you can find. But that crisis is devastating that resilience, the strength that they have. They're creating an alienation in them. You see?
Mm.
I love the Haitian people and I love the country. They have a beautiful country, and they themselves are beautiful people.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I will end my contribution with a personal story to exemplify that, and that is that over the last year, I have faced more difficulties and more challenges than I could have ever imagined having to face as an adult in every area of my life. And I have had so many people. Now, I live in New Zealand, far, far away from my family and my friends. Because of COVID, the borders are completely closed. So during a time of great personal crises, I'm alone. I've moved to a new city. So I don't even have, I'm not even surrounded by the friends that I'd made over the last 9 years. They're 3 or 4 hours away. So I've had many friends from South Africa that live in New Zealand, or, white New Zealanders, Chinese New Zealand, Indian New Zealand. I've had many friends say, how can you, even a East African friend who's been in New Zealand for 13 years, how can you still smile? How can you still put yourself together and leave the house every day? If I were in your situation, I wouldn't get out of bed. I wouldn't be able to function. I wouldn't be able to live life. Some people have even said, I would probably have taken my life. And I just keep hearing that last line in Maya Angelou's Still I Rise. I carry it in my spirit, since having heard it around the age of 9 or 10. I am the hope and the dream of the slave.
Mm.
And what I've said to people is, in the moments, in the darkest moments of greatest despair, I think that my ancestors survived the transatlantic slave trade, and they thrived in such a way that I could stand here today, that I could have a doctorate from one of the best law schools in the United States, that I could have been to every continent in over 35 countries and worked as a corporate lawyer, that my children can be in their, bougie private school, of which I'm so proud of the education that they're able to get, something that my grandmother, my mother's mother, who had to leave school at the age of 9 to look after her brothers and sisters, and my mother, who left school at high school, my ancestors, my mom, my grandma, my immediate ancestors, let alone hundreds of years ago, my enslaved ancestors, could have never imagined where I stand today, could have only hoped that I would stand here today, still carrying their vision, their memory, still carrying their dreams, still carrying them with me, which I do. And my children, who are half Kiwi, and so are even, light or fairer than I am, they're very confident in their West African ancestry. My beautiful daughter says, we're Black on the inside, eh, Mom? And I said, yes, darling, you're African on the inside.
That's right.
And so, that perspective of who I am and where I've come from, because a lot of people say, why does it matter? We're all the same, but we're not all the same. And knowing what my ancestors endured, and that they endured it with grace and strength and courage, gives me strength and courage and grace today for every step that I take. I feel a great sense of filial duty, of responsibility to my ancestors, in every moment of every day. And it's a different perspective. It's not the perspective of, we were sinful and we were enslaved and we're rubbish and we're Black, so we're bad. But it's a perspective of, we were strong and courageous in the face of great adversity. And I come from those that survived. We survived.
That's right. Our story need to be viewed, seen by all from our own perspective, not from the perspective of the perpetrator or the dominant. No, we have to look at our history from our own perspective. Now, you raise a question, an issue, by talking about your identity, how you could have be who you still are, without the hurtful situation that happened by the Taino being invaded and crushed, the African being taken and enslaved, and the Spaniards dominating over the two, and so forth. I would have loved to come back to that, but since we don't have time, we can probably pick it up in our
I would love to. Why don't we start there next week? Because I would like to, while we're discussing that, something for you to think about over the next week. There are, obviously, in the Bible, there are times when God uses massive sinful nations to enslave Israel. And so I think that we probably need to very realistically have that discussion. So let's pick it up there next time.
Yes, let's do that.
Thank you so much for your time. And just as a reminder to those that are listening and watching with us today, you are Joseph Zinseme from Bridge Networks. And I am Josmar Roman from Josmar Roman.
That's right.
Yeah, this is good. These are great reconciliation talks. So it sounds like we've started in on identity, and we'll continue with that next week, publishing it to your YouTube channel. And for those that are watching, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, concerns, post them in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe, and then you'll get a ding whenever we post a new video. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, and God bless each and every one.